Hello everybody, this is Danny. Today we'll be looking at the Risk Management Framework RMF at a high level. First you'll take a look at this diagram here where you can see the different steps. In the middle you see prepare, next you see categorize system, select controls, implement controls, assess the controls, authorize the system, and monitor the controls. Above that you'll see the different documentation that you'll be referencing when doing that specific step. Okay. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. Now, the first step, and while it's not called out in that diagram, is going to be step 0 and prepare. And it is actually in the middle of the diagram, but you don't see it. You don't see a number next to it. But this is a very important step. Okay, I'll go ahead and run through some of the information for this. So planning and gathering the personnel, documentation, information needed before starting system categorization. This includes registering the system, identifying personnel, and reading over documentation for your organization. Now that's an important one. Reading over documentation for organization because every organization is different. So the way that they're going to proceed with RMF process is different. And typically you'll have some type of RMF guidance or SOP that you're going to have to read over and understand what needs to be done before moving forward, such as identifying different personnel, your PSO, your PM, your ISSM, your ISI, and different personnel within that, stakeholders, and then planning and gathering those personnel, again, identifying the information, everything that's needed so that you can move forward with the categorization of the system. All right. So next you have categorize the system, and that can be broken down a little bit further there with FIPS 199, which reading FIPS tells you the different level of information and the sensitivity of information and different controls that need to be applied, such as encryption and such, for the different information. All right, types. All right, then you have SP NIST 800-60, which tells you how to identify the information types, select the provisional impact values, and then you'll ultimately get some type of low or high watermark. And then from there, reviewing and adjusting the impact values based off of almost like a questionnaire that will help you and assist you with assigning the system security categorization, which would be low, moderate, high, based off of if CIA is compromised for the data or the system or the data that the system processes would be the impact on CIA, right? And based off that, you'll either come up with low, moderate, or high, and that'll help you categorize the system so that when you select your controls next, you'll know which controls need to be selected according to that baseline, right? So the key activities in categorize the system include categorize the system in accordance with CNSSI 1253, describe the system including the system boundary and document the description and the security plan, register the system with the DoD component or cybersecurity program, and assign qualified personnel to the RMF rules. All right, next, implement security controls. So when you're implementing the security controls, you're going to be looking at NIST 800-53. There you can see the control families, for instance, access control, awareness and training. So not all of these are technical. Some of them are going to be policy and documentation, audit and accountability, assessment, authorization and monitoring, configuration management, which you can only imagine it gets more technical, contingency planning, and so on. Okay, and based off of NIST 800-53 and whatever the categorization was determined, you're going to have a baseline level of controls. They're going to have to be applied to that system. And some organizations, they may have some type of overlays that they want you, or enhanced controls they want you to apply to ensure that that system is secure. Okay. So go ahead and move through here, the key activities. So key activities, implement security controls specified in the security plan in accordance with DoD guidance. Okay. When I say assess security controls, that's typically done by an internal group within your organization that's going to validate your findings in either the POAM or your package and determine if they concur or non-concur with those, and validate the residual risk associated with those controls or technical findings. And at the end of it, they'll come to a conclusion on what they believe the residual risk to be for that system. This is different from the categorization of the system that we mentioned earlier. This is going to be based off of, according to NIST 800-53 revision 5, they've got some new categorization for very low, low, moderate, high, very high. Okay, so you can see that person with the little button there, and they click the risk analysis. Well, that's ultimately what they're trying to do. They're trying to review all information, ensure that there's traceability, validate the results, and determine the risk analysis according to NIST 800-53 revision 5. And this is typically done by an internal organization or group within your organization to prevent any conflict of interest. So the person who categorizes the system and selects the controls and implement the controls typically isn't going to be the same person who's assessing those controls. As you'd imagine, that would be a conflict of interest, right? So they're going to, in this case, the program is going to develop a security assessment plan, a SAP, on how they're going to move forward with assessing those controls. So let's say you have Windows on 16 server. You've got STIGs you got to apply for that server. All right, Microsoft on 16 server STIG. Then you got to apply IE if it's got IE. If it's got Microsoft Defender, you got to apply that STIG. If you got Defender, you got to do the advanced security and firewall STIG. And if you're hosting some type of web server on that, if it's a web server, you got ISS, the site, and server STIG on top of that, right? And aside from the STIGs, now you've got to do your ACAS scans for that specific system and whatever is within that boundary. Okay. Once you have determined the plan on what needs to be tested and if you have any exceptions, then it goes through the security assessment report. That again done by an internal group within your organization that's going to validate your findings and output a report on what they believe the residual risk to be for that system. No, very low, low, moderate, higher, very high. Okay. Then they'll go ahead and provide that report through a workflow that gets pushed through, and the authorizing official will see that report to help them come to their authorizing decision, right? Whether or not they want to authorize that system, or perhaps that system needs to look at some of the findings within their package before they can move forward. Okay, so addressing non-compliance security controls. What they're really looking at here, which controls are non-compliant. That's the first thing that that they're going to zero in on. Okay, you have a non-compliant security control here, and this is an important one. Why is it non-compliant? What's the impact of it not being compliant? What have you done to mitigate it, right? And the risk associated with it, and ultimately, how does that affect your system's risk? All right. All right. So once that's been determined, the authorizing official, the AO, will look at that package. Again, he's looking at the security assessment report provided by that group internally to your organization, and he's trying to, or she is trying to come to authorizing decision and whether or not they want to authorize that system. All right, so different things they're going to be doing. Key activities is to use vulnerabilities found in the security control assessment report and look at the plan of action and milestones, their POAM, right? Assemble security authorization package and submit it for adjudication. That's typically going to be the PM, PSO, making sure that that actually occurs within a timely manner. And then the authorizing official will determine if that system brings risk to organizations, operations, assets, individuals, and other organizations or the nation and they'll come to a conclusion whether or not they want to authorize it or not. And they're ultimately responsible for doing so. So this is typically going to be a senior leader within the organization, and in the military it may be a commander, and it's civilian enrolled it may be a senior, very senior level civilian. Okay, and different organizations, defense industrial base, they may have their own personnel that's going to help with that decision. So once the system's been authorized, typically you're not going to have a perfect system. There's going to be a POAM in place for some findings and how they plan to address those findings for either low or moderate, right? And how they're going to address those. And authorizing official may say, well, you need to address these within an X amount of period of time. They may set some type of conditions or stipulations on what needs to be done um, in order for that system to be granted its authorization or milestones that need to be completed within a specific period of time. Okay. It's even possible that they may send that package back for rework due to numerous issues, or in some cases, if something's really wrong, they can, uh, you know, DATO it, in which it doesn't receive an authorization and has to be disconnected, right? Because it brings too much risk to an organization, right? All right, so next, be looking at monitor security controls. Now, a whole lot of people have a stake in this because as time goes by, that system, for instance, Windows Server 2012, eventually needs to upgrade. May go EOL, may go EOS. They've got to set a plan on how they plan to upgrade it, possibly, right? And there's going to be changes along the road. So it's important for the organization to continuously monitor and make sure that those systems stay relevant. The software is being patched. As time goes by, you will have emerging threats and vulnerabilities. So you need to make sure that that gets documented in the POAM and how they're going to address those and how they're going to monitor the system to ensure that it's being protected. Those security controls are still effective, and also detecting any type of intrusions and how that may affect the residual risk that we called earlier or that was agreed upon during the ATO process, any changes that may occur over time, which will occur and do occur. So key activities include determining the security impact of any proposed or actual changes. So let's say, like I mentioned earlier, with the upgrading, that would be something like a baseline change. And depending on our organization, may have different use cases on where that would lie on the spectrum. Assess subset of security controls. So you may have A-star year 1, 2, and 3. So over a 3-year period, you'll assess a number of controls. Overall, by year 3, you'll have assessed the whole system and have a full package, right, ready. So your organization may have that in place, or you may just be assessing it every year. It just depends, organization by organization. Conduct remediation actions. Again, that's going to be annotated in the POAMs, right? Make sure your POAMs are up to date. Security statuses to the authorizing officials. So if there's been a change or compromise of the system, that needs to be reported to the authorizing official so that they know for situational awareness. All right. And at the end of it, that system is ultimately going to get decommissioned. You need to make sure you have a strategy in place. How are you going to decommission that system? You need to make sure that the sensitive information that system processes is, destroyed properly. The system is decommissioned properly and deregistered from any databases it may have been registered in. And so you have to have a strategy in place about how you plan to do that, including the funding that's going to be required to ensure that gets done. All right. So this is going to be the full process here, right? So don't forget step 0, prepare. Step 1, categorization, categorize the system. Step 2, select security controls. Step 3, implement security controls. Step 4, assess the security controls. Step 5, authorize the system. And Step 6, monitor the security controls. All right. Do not forget prepare. I can't tell you how many interviews I've been in where they've asked me what's step 0, and had I not known step 0, they would have moved on with other candidates. So it's important that you remember that, and you remember each one of these steps. Now, once you get your feet wet, you actually work with RMF, you'll understand this process, but it takes time. And like I mentioned earlier, it's not possible. It's not typically possible that the person categorizing the system, selecting the security control, implementing the security controls is going to be the same person who's going to do the validation for the security controls. It's typically done by an external entity, and that's typically not be the same person who's going to authorize the system. That's done by a senior level executive and their assisted support, right? And the person monitoring the security controls, that's going to be a group of people, usually throughout the whole chain from step 1 through 5 are going to be involved with that, right? But mainly monitor security controls typically be the ISIs, the sysadmins are typically going to really play a part in that. But of course, it goes through that process continuously, and it talks about ConMon and how they want to utilize continuous monitoring, right? And different organizations have that in place. But this is the process. This is a breakdown. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope this was enlightening to you. Please consider liking and subscribing. There's many more videos. I have some on staking, just play on ethical hacking, and there's a lot of other content that you could view on my channel. Danny, out.